Today we're talking about Filippo Marinetti, a man whose nickname was the Caffeine of Europe. Marinetti was a poet, and he was also the leader of the Italian Futurist movement. So let's learn a little bit about Marinetti's origin story. The year is 1909, and somewhere outside of Milan, Marinetti is speeding down country lanes. Marinetti quickly turns a corner, and in front of him are two cyclists. He doesn't have much time, and so in an instant, he turns the wheel and he swerves and lands upside down in a ditch. Now, for most people, this would be a really bad situation. Most people don't want to end up in traffic collisions. But not Marinetti. As he crawled out of his car, he was covered in bruises, but not seriously injured. He felt ecstatic, and he said that his heart had been pierced with the red-hot sword of joy, which is a strange quote. I don't really get it, but that's what he said. Marinetti felt so inspired following his traffic collision that he wrote the Futurist Manifesto, directed at all men who feel truly alive. It declared a love of danger, machines and speed, and it claimed that great art had to be aggressive. It stated that it wished to glorify war, which Marinetti described as the hygiene of the world. It stated that Futurism wished to destroy museums, libraries and all relics of the past, which is quite a big deal when you come from Italy. And Marinetti promised to fight feminism, and he declared that the Futurists held scorn for women. These are just a couple of excerpts, but I think it gives you a sense of who Marinetti was and what the Futurists stand for. And as I mentioned previously, Marinetti was not an artist, he was a poet. But to be honest, he spent most of his time making these grand speeches and writing these bold manifestos which outlined his futurist vision. Now, as I was researching this video and reading about Marinetti, he kept reminding me of the internet sensation Andrew Tate. They both glorify aggression and masculinity. They're both misogynistic and anti-feminist. They both align themselves with right-wing and fascist ideas. They were both bald. They both talk a lot and make a lot of grand speeches. And they both have a kind of dramatic flair, and they both know how to cultivate media attention and infamy. I'm not saying they're the exact same, but there is a lot of overlap, and there's just something a bit alt-right about the whole futurist movement. So like I said before, Marinetti was making big speeches and writing manifestos, outlining his futurist vision for art and life, and this garnered him a following of young Italian painters and poets. The main futurist painters were Giacomo Balla, Carlo Carra, Gino Severini, Umberto Boccioni, and Luigi Russolo. And I know that's a lot of names. The important thing to remember is that Boccioni was considered the most talented of all those painters. And in 1910, they wrote the Manifesto of Futurist Painters. They wrote it in a single day in a cafe in Milan, and Marinetti came to join them in the evening, read over the manifesto and added some final touches, which I'm not exactly sure what that means, but he looked over it before they were allowed to publish the manifesto. The Manifesto of Futurist Painters talks a lot about the importance of rebellion and destroying Italy's cult of the past, which they believed suffocated everything which was young, new and alive. They claimed that Italy was the land of the dead, and they also claimed that they were leading a rebirth in Italian culture. You could say they were making Italy great again. They signed off their manifesto: make room for youth, for violence, for daring. So at this point, you're probably getting a flavour of what the Futurists are all about. And as I'm sure you can tell, they're a nasty bunch of people. So the Futurists were talking a big game, but they needed a radical painting style which could match the boldness of their manifestos. And Boccioni had been studying a technique called divisionism, which was developed by the neo-impressionists in France. Divisionism used small dots of colour to create vibrancy and movement within a painting. This is my favourite futurist painting. It's called The City Rises, and it was painted by Boccioni, and it depicts a factory horse that's gone rogue, and it uses divisionism. I love this painting because it contains so much vibrancy, so much movement and so much energy just using small dots of colour. But soon the Futurists started hearing about this new painting technique which had been developed in France called Cubism. And the Futurists always wanted to be associated with whatever was new and young and trendy. And so they became a little bit obsessed with Cubism, and they started to incorporate the Cubist aesthetic into their own work. Cubism was a form of painting that focused on depicting the same object from multiple angles at the same time, as it would exist in your mind rather than in reality. I know that's a mouthful. I've made a whole video about Cubism, which I'd recommend you watch because it will give you more context around Futurism. You can watch it after this. This is what the thumbnail looks like. But yeah, so here's what Futurist painting looked like once it had incorporated the Cubist aesthetic into their own visual language. But Futurism was more than just a movement of painters. It was an all-encompassing philosophy of life. Marinetti was giving big speeches where he was trying to break down language and advocating for the abolition of punctuation and replacing it with musical symbols. Boccioni was exploring energy and movement within sculpture. This sculpture, made by Boccioni in 1913, was featured on the Euro coin in 2002. Luigi Russolo was building his own futurist opera, which involved the sounds of cars, aeroplanes, trains, and noises you'd find in a city. Russolo was proud of the fact that he was not a trained musician, and his opera went on tour to various European cities. I've got no idea how it worked, but it looks mental. I love the pictures. There was also a futurist film. At the invitation of Marinetti, the Italian film director, Anton Bragaglia, definitely pronounced that wrong, made a film called Vita Futurista. The film has since been lost, and all we're left with is some stills. I can't imagine it was a very good film, but it was nonetheless a film. And finally, the architect Antonio St. Elia drew his visions of a futurist city, where the old Italy is nowhere to be seen. The buildings are massive and they look like machines. These drawings ominously anticipate Mussolini's fascist mass society, which was just around the corner. Hey guys, coming to you live from the editing room. If you've made it this far into the video, then clearly you're enjoying the video and you're getting some kind of value out of my content. If you can afford to, please consider becoming a patron. For as little as £4.50 a month or $5 a month, you can help me to continue making art educational videos which are on the internet that anyone can access for free. I'd hugely appreciate it. You would be supporting a good cause and you would get access to my monthly newsletter. Think about it. If you can't afford it, don't worry, that's completely fine. This is out here for anyone to watch for free. I would also really appreciate it if you can hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, like the video, leave a comment, do whatever you can to help me grow this channel. Thank you so much, enjoy the video, and yeah, have a great day. Since their inception, the Futurists had celebrated and glorified war. Marinetti famously declared that war was the hygiene of the world in his manifesto. Well, as it turns out, war was just around the corner. Marinetti had been tirelessly advocating for Italy to join the interventionist cause, and in May 1915, Italy did just that. Marinetti and a bunch of futurists signed up for voluntary service, and they were swiftly deployed. The futurists may have glamorized the idea of war, but they were about to find out that the reality of war was actually very different. In August of 1916, Boccioni, the most talented of all the futurist painters, died tragically when he fell off his horse during a training exercise. This was a big blow to the morale of the futurist movement. Once war began, Carlo Carra started to distance himself from Marinetti, and when Carra was called up for military service in 1917, he was diagnosed as mentally ill, and eventually he ended up in a military hospital. During the war years, both Carlo Carra and Severini started to explore more traditional styles of painting, and both artists started taking inspiration from the Italian Renaissance, something that the Futurist movement had fiercely opposed. Carra said, "A need had matured in me for something different and more measured, a strong desire to identify my paintings with history, and particularly Italian history. Futurism may have been fun when they were just a couple of radical, edgy right-wing kids running around Italy. But now war had broken out, Boccioni had died, and things had got a bit too real, and Severini and Cara were tapping out. Now that Boccioni was dead, and Cara and Severini had tapped out, Giacomo Balla, kind of by default, became the leading futurist painter. And Balla, alongside another Italian painter called Prampolini, developed this new futurist style of painting that was called aero painting. And basically it was painting that took inspiration from all things aviation, planes, jets, engines, flight, the sky, all that sort of thing. To be honest, I don't think much of aero painting. I don't think any of it's that interesting, and a lot of it was just, I don't really know, it was just happening. But soon enough, Balla would tap out himself, and then this guy Prampolini becomes the new futurist painter, and all the original painters have gone off. But Marinetti was keeping busy. He was touring the country, making grand speeches, and looking for new futurist recruits. He was also spending more and more time associating with an upcoming fascist politician by the name of Benito Mussolini. In 1922, Mussolini and his followers marched on Rome, and he subsequently became the fascist dictator of Italy. Marinetti was delighted to see Mussolini take power. In fact, Marinetti had been gravitating towards fascism for a while now, and he had even been part of the Fascist Party's Central Committee in 1919. Unlike other fascist leaders, Mussolini was tolerant of modern art. In fact, before becoming Prime Minister, he had expressed admiration for Futurism and for the paintings of Boccioni. But once Mussolini takes control of Italy, he begins to distance himself from Marinetti and the Futurist movement. He began to realise that hanging out with all these weird fascist artists wasn't actually a very good look, and didn't make normal people respect him very much. During Mussolini's dictatorship, Futurism disintegrated into tacky fascist propaganda. When Italy invaded Ethiopia in 1936, Marinetti, at the age of 60, signed up. During these final years of his life, Marinetti became an unashamed apologist for the fascist regime. And in 1940, during World War II, Marinetti even went to fight on the Eastern Front at the age of 65, but apparently he only lasted a couple of weeks before deciding to go back to Italy. Marinetti died in his sleep in 1944, only a few months before Mussolini himself was executed. I've got mixed feelings about the Futurist movement because, on the one hand, they were clearly a bunch of fascists and I've got no respect for them. But on the other hand, they made some amazing artworks, and I can't deny that those artworks are very good. So yeah, but still, not excusing their behaviour, I don't think they're good people, and I'm not trying to celebrate them. But they did have a big impact on what came next in modern art. For example, they had a huge impact on Vorticism in the UK, on constructivism in Russia, or it might have been the Soviet Union at that point, I can't remember. Big influence on Surrealist movement, on the Dada movement. They were also the first artists to really embrace the manifesto, which was going to be a huge thing moving forward. So it's a significant movement, and it helps to know about it, which is kind of why I made this video. Because as you might start to notice, I'm kind of trying to make videos about artists and movements in a sequential way now, starting with the Picasso video, and then I got distracted and made some videos about other things. But now this video on Futurism, and moving forward, that's what I'm going to try and do, and try and trace those links between movements and between influences and stuff like that. Anyway, if you made it this far, I'm deeply, deeply grateful. Post a cat emoji in the comments so I know you made it to the end. Also, am I pushing the Andrew Tate analogy too far? Is that a thing? Can you see that, or is that just me? Anyway, thank you for watching, and like and subscribe.